In a world where equality should be the norm, there are still moments that challenge our belief in progress. Sometimes those moments happen in the places we least expect, in spaces we've built ourselves. For Aaliyah Carter, a successful Black CEO and entrepreneur, that moment came on what should have been an ordinary, even joyful day. Aaliyah had spent over a decade building Motoring Excellence, a high-end car dealership known for its cutting-edge inventory and elite customer service. What began as a modest startup had blossomed into a cornerstone of the community, a modern showroom that featured luxury brands, including Bentley and Rolls-Royce, with a staff of over 40 employees. It wasn't just a business, it was a symbol of her perseverance, vision, and leadership. That morning, Aaliyah arrived early, excited to unveil the dealership's latest models. Clad in a sleek, blush-toned dress that exuded professionalism and confidence, she walked into the showroom with pride in her heart. The polished floors reflected the shimmer of the new cars, and the buzz of early customers filled the space. To her, it was a symphony, the sound of success, but the harmony shattered the moment she stepped toward the service desk. Behind the counter stood Greg, the dealership's long-serving manager. He had worked there nearly since the beginning, someone Aaliyah had trusted with daily operations, especially when she wasn't on site. Today, however, Greg didn't offer his usual warm greeting. There was no smile, no acknowledgement. His eyes flicked toward her, then away, as if he didn't recognize her. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said in a flat tone, "but we can't assist you right now. You'll need to wait for a customer service representative." Aaliyah blinked. Had she heard him correctly? "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Greg, it's me, Aaliyah. I own this dealership." A moment of silence followed, thick with tension. Several nearby customers turned to look, some frowning, others merely curious. Greg didn't flinch. Instead, he folded his arms and replied, "I understand that you say that, ma'am, but I'll still need to see some identification. We're trying to maintain order this morning." "Order?" Aaliyah was stunned. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity. It was something far deeper, more insidious. She felt her stomach churn, the weight of the moment settling in her chest like a stone. Was this really happening? In her own business? To her? "What kind of order are you maintaining?" she asked, her voice quiet but sharp. "The kind where a black woman is presumed to be out of place in a luxury showroom. One she built?" Greg's face remained unreadable. "I'm just following procedure." At that moment, something shifted. The atmosphere in the dealership, once vibrant and inviting, turned cold and uncertain. A few customers stepped forward, murmuring among themselves. One woman whispered to another, "That's her. She's the owner. I read about her in Forbes last year." It didn't take long before the situation escalated. Security was called, not by Aaliyah, but by Greg, and soon 2 uniformed officers appeared, standing awkwardly as they tried to assess the scene. "Is there a problem here?" one of them asked. "No," Aaliyah replied, standing tall, "unless being a black businesswoman is now a crime." The officers looked at each other, then back at Greg. One of them turned to Aaliyah, offering a respectful nod. "Ma'am, if you are who you say you are, I'm sure we can clear this up quickly." Aaliyah pulled out her ID and her business license. The officer reviewed them and nodded again, this time more apologetically. "Thank you, Ms. Carter." Greg's expression shifted, not with guilt, but with irritation. The damage, however, was done. Within hours, the incident spread on social media. A customer had discreetly filmed the exchange and uploaded it with the caption, "Black CEO denied at her own dealership. Still think racism is over?" The video went viral. Local news outlets picked up the story. Civil rights advocates weighed in. What was meant to be a simple product launch became a national conversation. Aaliyah released a statement the following day, not filled with anger but with resolve. This experience, as painful as it was, reflects a larger issue, one that many people of color face in workplaces, businesses, and institutions every day. Motoring excellence will continue to stand for integrity, inclusivity, and respect. That will never change. Greg was terminated following an internal review, but for Aaliyah, the scars lingered, not just as a CEO, but as a black woman forced to defend her place in a space she created. And yet, she remained undeterred. She returned to her showroom the next morning, head held high, determined to ensure that no one else, employee or customer, would ever feel like they didn't belong. As the tension in the air thickened, Aaliyah Carter stood tall, despite the knot of frustration building in her chest. She could feel the weight of every pair of eyes in the showroom, curious, judgmental, supportive, confused, boring into her. The moment was no longer private, it was public, and every second of Greg's defiance deepened the wound. This wasn't just about poor customer service. Greg's refusal to recognize her, to acknowledge her role as the owner of Motoring Excellence, was a deeply personal betrayal and a blatant act of discrimination. Aaliyah had hired Greg. She had mentored him. She had trusted him with a leadership role in a business she built from the ground up. And now here he was, denying her basic dignity in front of staff and customers. "I need to speak to someone who can help me," she said, her voice firm, cutting through the growing whispers. But Greg didn't back down. "Perhaps next time." "Ma'am, you could call ahead," he replied coolly, not even meeting her eyes. His words stung. They reeked of condescension, the kind of veiled dismissal that people of color know all too well. It wasn't just what he said, but how he said it, as if she were an intruder, not a founder. Aaliyah's pulse quickened. Her thoughts raced. She thought of the early mornings, the sleepless nights, the countless rejections she faced from banks, investors, and competitors while building this dream. She thought of the job fairs where she recruited young talent from underrepresented backgrounds. She thought of the community workshops she hosted to uplift women and minorities in business. And here she was, invalidated by her own employee in her own domain. With a deep breath, Aaliyah steadied herself. There would be no yelling, no emotional outburst. She had learned long ago that people expected black women to react loudly, and that their professionalism was always under scrutiny. So instead, she responded with the calm authority that made her who she was. "I want to speak to a higher authority. Right now." Greg looked momentarily thrown off, but remained silent. The front desk attendant, who had been watching nervously, picked up the phone and called someone. A few tense minutes passed. The dealership, usually full of chatter and sales energy, had gone uncomfortably quiet. Then the glass doors opened, and in walked Samantha Hughes, the regional manager for the dealership network, and a woman who had long admired Aaliyah's leadership. Dressed in a crisp navy suit and heels clicking purposefully on the tile floor, she approached the scene with evident concern. "Aaliyah," she said with a surprised but respectful nod, "what's going on here?" Aaliyah wasted no time. She laid out the situation clearly and without embellishment, her voice unwavering. As she spoke, Samantha's face shifted from confusion to disbelief, then to pale discomfort. She turned slowly toward Greg, who stood rigid, beads of sweat forming on his brow. "Greg," she said sharply, "is this true?" Greg didn't respond. He looked down, then at the wall, his jaw clenched. The silence said everything. "This is unacceptable," Samantha said, her tone clipped and decisive. "Not only is Ms. Carter the owner of this establishment, she is also one of the top-performing partners in our entire region. What you've done isn't just offensive, it's grounds for serious disciplinary action." A murmur rippled through the showroom. Some employees exchanged glances, others nodded silently in agreement. Aaliyah remained composed, but inside, a storm of emotion swirled. Anger, sadness, fatigue, vindication. It was exhausting, she thought, always having to fight for the right to simply exist in spaces she had earned. "I appreciate your quick response," Aaliyah told Samantha. "But this is not just a performance issue. It's about culture. It's about respect. And it's about accountability." Samantha nodded. "I understand. We'll be initiating an immediate review, and I promise you, this will not be brushed aside." Greg was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. But for Aaliyah, the damage had already been done. What should have been a normal workday had turned into a moment of reckoning. A painful reminder that success does not shield black women from prejudice. Later that evening, Aaliyah sat in her office, looking out at the lot of gleaming vehicles. She had worked so hard to bring to life. She knew she would recover. She always had. But she also knew that progress, real, systemic progress, only came when silence was broken. So she drafted a statement, not just for her team, but for her customers and her community, one that would affirm her commitment to integrity, equity, and inclusion. One that made it clear motoring excellence would never tolerate discrimination, not even from within, because if change was going to come, it had to start right here. Samantha ushered Aaliyah into her private office, closing the door softly behind them. The walls, adorned with certificates of dealership excellence and photos of past team events, suddenly felt cold, sterile reminders of a workplace that now seemed hollow. Aaliyah sat down slowly, her posture poised but her heart heavy. For a few moments there was silence, the kind that settles in the aftermath of a betrayal. "I've worked so hard to create an inclusive environment here," Aaliyah began, her voice low but raw with emotion. "This wasn't just about me being disrespected as an individual. It was about everything I've stood for, everything I've built. For a manager to treat me this way, in front of customers and staff, is beyond unacceptable." Her voice trembled slightly, but she didn't look away. She couldn't afford to. Not now. Not after what had just transpired. Samantha listened intently, her brow furrowed as she jotted notes in a small leather-bound planner. "Aaliyah, I'm so sorry. This happened. I can't even begin to imagine how this must have felt. But please know I do not, and will never, tolerate discrimination in any form in my dealerships. This is serious. We will get to the bottom of it." She paused and looked Aaliyah in the eye. "Greg's behavior not only violated our core values, it undermined the trust this company is supposed to be built on. I promise you this won't go unchecked." Aaliyah gave a small nod of appreciation, but her mind remained alert. Promises were a good start, but accountability would be the real test. They sat in silence for another moment before Samantha closed her planner and stood. "Let's go. We're addressing this now. Together." Back on the main floor, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. What had started as a quiet, even mundane day of business had evolved into something much larger. Customers had stopped browsing and were gathered in small clusters, whispering. Several employees stood behind desks, but were clearly paying more attention to the unfolding drama than to their duties. And then there were the customers who had witnessed the confrontation earlier, now unmistakably supportive, with some giving Aaliyah subtle nods of encouragement. One woman standing beside a red Bentley mouthed the words, "I'm so sorry," as Aaliyah passed by. Greg remained near the service desk, trying to act composed, though the flush in his cheeks betrayed him. His eyes flicked up as Samantha and Aaliyah approached. For the first time, uncertainty crept into his expression. "Greg," Samantha began, her voice calm but layered with authority. "We need to talk, now." He stiffened, then nodded, still refusing to meet Aaliyah's eyes. "Of course." "No," Samantha said sharply. "Not in private. Right here. This isn't just about company policy. This is about public accountability." A hush fell across the showroom. Everyone could hear now. You disrespected the owner of this dealership, someone who built this business from the ground up. You dismissed her, humiliated her, and questioned her authority in front of customers and staff. Greg opened his mouth to speak, but Samantha held up a hand. No, I'm not finished. She turned to Aaliyah. Ms. Carter, would you like to add anything? Aaliyah took a breath. The eyes of employees, customers, her community were all on her. Yes, she said clearly. Greg didn't just fail to recognize me. He failed to recognize the values we uphold: respect, dignity, and equity. This dealership was founded to break barriers, not to reinforce them. Greg looked cornered. I didn't mean anything by it. But that's exactly the problem, Aaliyah cut in. You didn't have to mean it. You acted out, of bias, whether conscious or not. And when confronted, you doubled down instead of listening. Samantha nodded gravely. Effective immediately, you're suspended pending a full investigation. HR will be in touch. A gasp rippled through the room. Greg looked stunned, not angry, just finally aware of the consequences of his actions. He nodded once and turned, heading toward the exit. As the door closed behind him, a round of light but heartfelt applause broke out among the onlookers. Not a celebration, but an acknowledgement, a moment of recognition. Aaliyah stood still, letting it all settle in. The day had begun with optimism and excitement and had veered into disbelief and pain, but now there was something else, a quiet but powerful reclamation of space. Samantha turned to her. We're with you, Aaliyah. This is your house. And today you reminded all of us what leadership really looks like. And as Aaliyah looked around the showroom, at her staff, her customers, her legacy, she knew the battle was far from over. But today, she had won something greater than an argument. She had reaffirmed her presence, and that presence could never again be denied. Greg, we need to talk, Samantha called out, her tone authoritative. As they gathered in a corner, Samantha laid out the facts. You treated Aaliyah, the owner of this dealership, with disrespect. That is not only unprofessional, but also unacceptable behavior. Greg's face flushed with anger and arrogance. I was just following protocol, he claimed, but the room was thick with disbelief. Aaliyah interjected, There is no protocol that says you can deny service to the owner. This is about respect. The tension in the room was now impossible to ignore. Every word spoken seemed to hang in the air, heavy and electric. Employees had stopped what they were doing. Customers leaned against the hoods of luxury cars, pretending to browse but clearly listening. Some held their phones low, subtly recording what they sensed was no ordinary workplace dispute. Samantha and Aaliyah stood side by side, facing Greg, who remained obstinate at the service counter. His posture was defensive, arms folded tightly across his chest, and his jaw locked in a stubborn clench. He had been called out, publicly and justifiably, but instead of backing down or showing remorse, he decided to double down. I don't see what the problem is, Greg snapped, his voice louder now, cutting through the stillness. People like her always think they can walk in and expect special privileges. The room gasped. Audible gasps, sharp intakes of breath, and low murmurs swelled around the showroom like a wave. A silence followed that was louder than the noise, a silence that felt dangerous and final. Aaliyah's breath caught in her throat. There it was. The mask had fallen off. Greg hadn't just been disrespectful. He had been deliberate. His bias wasn't hidden behind corporate etiquette anymore. It stood exposed, ugly and undeniable. Samantha's eyes widened in disbelief. She took a half step forward, her heels clicking against the polished tile floor. Excuse me? She said, her voice low, stunned. Did you just say? I said what I said, Greg shot back, shrugging. Look, I've worked here longer than most people. I've seen the kind of attention she gets, the way people tiptoe around her. It's not fair. I was just doing my job. Aaliyah took a deep breath. grounding herself. Her hands were trembling slightly, but her voice was steady. Doing your job doesn't give you permission to discriminate, and if you believe that respect is a privilege only granted to some, then you were never fit to lead in this company. Greg scoffed and looked away. That was it. The breaking point. Samantha's demeanor changed. Gone was the composed professionalism. In its place was righteous authority. "You've just confirmed everything we feared," she said, eyes locked on him. "You've not only disrespected your superior, but you've exposed a deeply troubling mindset that has no place in this business, or in any business." Greg laughed nervously, glancing around at the stunned faces of the crowd. "So what? You're going to fire me for telling the truth?" Samantha didn't blink. "No. I'm firing you because your truth is rooted in ignorance, disrespect, and racism." A hush fell. Then she spoke the words that rang like a gavel strike. "Greg, you're terminated immediately. Your access will be revoked. Security will escort you out." His smirk dropped. "You're kidding me." "I'm absolutely not," she replied, her tone cold as steel. "Get your things and leave." At that moment, something unexpected happened. Spontaneous applause erupted throughout the showroom. It started with a slow clap from a young woman near the sales counter, and then others joined in. The sound grew, echoing off the high ceilings and bouncing off the glossy car hoods. It wasn't rowdy or vengeful. It was purposeful, validating. Customers and staff alike were applauding Aaliyah, applauding Samantha, applauding the decision to uphold dignity over silence. Greg stood stunned for a moment before retreating. To the back room without another word, Samantha turned to Aaliyah. "I'm so sorry you had to endure that, especially here in your own house." Aaliyah nodded, emotion tightening her throat. "Thank you, Samantha. That was the right call." A staff member walked over and placed a gentle hand on Aaliyah's arm. "We've got your back," he said simply. Another customer chimed in. "I've been coming here for years. You're the reason this place is special. What happened today? That was justice." Aaliyah smiled softly, humbled and emboldened all at once. "This place has always been about more than just selling cars," she said. "It's about community. It's about trust. And now more than ever, it's about accountability." She turned to Samantha, who nodded in agreement. "Let's meet tomorrow morning. We need to speak with the whole staff. It's time to reaffirm who we are and what we stand for." As the applause faded and people returned to their business, a new energy settled over the dealership. It wasn't just about one man being let go. It was about drawing a line in the sand. That day, Aaliyah didn't just reclaim her authority, she reclaimed her vision of a place where excellence wasn't just a name on the sign, but a value everyone had to live by. In the days that followed, the news of the incident spread rapidly. Aaliyah's story became a symbol of resilience and strength within the community. People rallied around her, and the dealership gained newfound support from both customers and local businesses. To ensure a more inclusive environment, Aaliyah implemented mandatory sensitivity training for all staff members, fostering a culture of respect and understanding. She also began mentoring young women of color, aspiring to enter the automotive industry, creating opportunities for others to succeed. Aaliyah's experience became a powerful reminder that taking a stand against discrimination and injustice can lead to positive change. Her story inspired many, proving that it is possible to turn adversity into a catalyst for growth and progress. With each passing day, motoring excellence thrived, continuing to be a beacon of hope and equality in the community.